Okay, I think we'll get started. If everyone's ready. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leo Baeck Institute. Thanks for coming out on this very cold night. You won't be disappointed. It'll be a great event. So before we begin, just a few words about the Leo Baeck Institute. If you're not familiar with LBI, we are a research archive and library dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of German-speaking Jewry. Our extensive collections, which are still going, cover centuries of German Jewish life before the Holocaust and in the years after. We have another exciting event coming up later this month, which is the Archive dance performance with Israeli-American choreographer Netta Pulvermacher. Will be here on February 24th, 25th, and 26th. So you can get tickets to those on LBI's website. And one more plug for LBI, we're also releasing episodes of our podcast, Exile with Mandy Patinkin, right now, coming out every Tuesday, including today. So you can listen to that where you listen to your podcasts or on LBI's website. Our talk tonight is Rupture, Reconciliation, and Visual Storytelling. And we are honored to have Stefanie Fischer and Kim Wünschmann here tonight to present their book, Oberbrechen, A German Village Confronts Its Nazi Past. I won't say too much about the book because you'll hear it in the presentation, but we'll also have flyers in the back of the room after the presentation where you can scan a QR code and buy the book and read some effusive praise of the book. And we're also very lucky to have Doris and Ronnie Frank with us tonight, who are members of the Lichtenstein family, who are prominently featured in the book, and they will come up to the panel later. I also heard that it's Ronnie's birthday today. So everyone help celebrate. And our moderator tonight is Ari Richter, sitting in the center there, I'll give the bio in a second. Stefanie Fischer is a faculty member at the Center for Anti-Semitism Research at the Technical University of Berlin. She is also the author of Jewish Cattle Traders in the German Countryside, 1919 to 1939. Economic Trust and Anti-Semitic Violence, which she presented at LBI this past fall. And you can watch that presentation on LBI's website or YouTube. Kim Wünschmann is the director of the Institute for the History of German Jews in Hamburg. And aside from Oberbrechen, she is the author of Before Auschwitz, Jewish Prisoners in the Pre-War Concentration Camps, and the co-editor of Living the German Revolution, 1918 to 1919. We're also thrilled to have Ari Richter here. As I said, Ari is the author of the graphic memoir, Never Again Will I Visit Auschwitz, which he also presented at LBI last fall. He is a visual artist, cartoonist, and professor at LaGuardia Community College in the City University of New York. And the talk will be followed by a Q&A, followed by a drinks reception where you can continue the conversation. And again, we have flyers in the back of the room where you can scan a QR code and buy the book. So thank you. Let's get started.
Well, I just want to, as the moderator, I just want to say welcome and thank you, Stefanie, for putting this together, and thank you for everyone at Leo Baeck Institute and the Center for Jewish History for hosting us. We're going to start today's programming with a presentation from our wonderful authors. So Stefanie and Kim are going to give us an image presentation, right, about their wonderful new book, Oberbrechen, and I'll let you both take it away.
First of all, thank you all, and thank you, Stefanie, and also thank you, Ari, for the warm welcoming, and thank you all for coming here tonight. And it's really special for us to be here tonight and to present our book at the Center for Jewish History and the Leo Baeck Institute. We will start with a reading of the first chapter of our book.
And you will find the panels on the monitors. In 2013, Kim and Stefanie embarked on a road trip through the American Southwest. They were on their way to a conference in Denver. Stefanie, what's your conference paper going to be about?
I'm going to talk about German Jews who visited their hometowns after the Holocaust. I'm having a hard time making sense of lasting relationships German Jewish refugees had with their former neighbors. I wonder what colleagues at the conference will make of that.
Such relationships, friendships even, don't fit how we normally think about Jewish, non-Jewish encounters after the Holocaust.
You're right. I've been wondering why anyone would return to a place where they've been discriminated against and abused, where family members were deported and later murdered.
Come to think of it, even in Oberbrechen, the village where I grew up, Jews who'd fled the country under the Nazis came back to visit later on. I remember visits from a school friend of my grandfather's, Kurt Lichtenstein.
What an amazing story. Perhaps we could explore it together.
I don't know. This history is very personal for me. Shouldn't historians have some distance from their research?
I guess this raises larger questions about writing history. Why do we do what we do? What motivates us? How do we work with sources that are part of our own family history?
Well, it's a pity that I can't ask my opa anymore. He was the village mayor back then. But I could contact an old friend of his, Eugen Kaspari. I wonder where this journey into the past will take me.
After the conference, Stefanie returned to Berlin and came to Jerusalem, where she worked at the Hebrew University.
I'll write to Eugen to find out more about Oberbrechen's Jews and their relations with the village after the Holocaust. Could this maybe be the start for a letter? I remember that my late Opa Jupp and you made contacts with some of the Jewish survivors and you invited them to visit the village. Kurt Lichtenstein came and some of the Stern family too. In rural areas in Germany, Christians and Jews had lived together for generations and knew each other closely. So experiences of anti-Semitic persecution were very personal. How strange that the persecuted didn't sever their ties with the place they'd been forced to leave. I've recently been talking about these visits with my friend and colleague Stefanie, and I'd be most grateful if you could help us to find out more. How did the post-war contact come about? What happened when former neighbors met again? And are there any sources we could look at?
A letter from Israel, from Jupp Kram's granddaughter. What a surprise. She lives in Jerusalem and she wants to know about our contacts with the Jewish families from Oberbrechen. That was a long time ago, but I do remember and will try to answer all her questions. As mayor of Oberbrechen, Jupp had to overcome a lot of obstacles. As for his efforts to reconnect with Jews from Oberbrechen, I remember an incident not long after the war when Moritz Stern visited the place incognito. Not knowing of this stranger, Jupp started up a conversation and found out who he was and that he had returned from exile. Jupp overcame the visitor's reluctance and took him to an inn, where he introduced him to a group of elderly village folk. With friendlier thoughts than those he had arrived with, Moritz Stern returned to his new home in America. A chronicle covering the history of Oberbrechen was one of the lasting legacies of Jupp Kram's time as a mayor. I remember working on the article well. Jupp and I did indeed contact former Oberbrecheners who were Jewish and some of their descendants. We contacted Kurt Lichtenstein, a schoolmate of Jupp's, and the Seattle musician Gustav Stern, whose father came from a family with deep roots in Oberbrechen. and Adolf Abu Bisman from Naharia, Israel, whose mother was born in Oberbrechen. True friendships developed and they deepened on every visit. Before the visit, they didn't want anything to do with us Germans ever again. Gustav Stern said he had to force himself to set foot on German soil and exchange words with a German. Berlin, back in fall 2013. Kim, Eugen's sources about that time are impressive. Let's do it.
Kurt Lichtenstein returns home after an absence of 41 years and he's overwhelmed by his reception.
I guess that these sources don't give us the full picture. They only show the perspective of the non-Jewish hosts. How can we find out about how Kurt himself felt about his visit to Oberbrechen?
You're right. Susie and Kurt don't look particularly happy. Look at Susie's expression, and she stands very close to her husband.
Look, they didn't come alone. They were accompanied by friends, another couple from Argentina.
Oh, my Opa Josef Kraum took that photo. This was when he was mayor of Oberbrechen, and I was a baby at that time. According to the newspaper article, Kurt Lichtenstein took a walk through the village with Mayor Kramm. In the evening, Mayor Kramm arranged a meeting of their age cohort, all those who started school in 1932. Kurt Lichtenstein gave an account of the life he'd led since leaving Germany in 1937. They joined approximately 100 German Jewish families in the Avigdor colony, set up by the Jewish Colonization Association in 1935 as an agricultural settlement for emigrants from Europe. Kurt's grandparents, Moritz and Lina Hess, later found refuge in Avigdor too.
The Avigdor colony was about 430 miles away from the capital, Buenos Aires. The closest train station was 15 miles away. There was neither electricity nor gas in the settlement. The roads were marked by wagon ruts, and when it rained, they became impassable. We received 185 acres of land which had to be cleared of shrubs and blocked. With no knowledge of the language, we couldn't communicate with the locals. During the first 15 years, swarms of locusts, so big you would think a storm of dark thunder clouds was approaching, flew in and destroyed the crops. Locusts ate clothes and basically everything that was made of iron or stone. The insects laid tens of thousands of eggs deep into even the hardest soil. Even with flamethrowers, we couldn't get rid of them. We could only wait until everything was eaten bare. We also struggled with scorpions, alligator-like creatures between 5 and 8 feet long.
Kurt came back for further visits. He met his old schoolmates at Josef Kramm's house. This is our dining room. What would Kurt have felt sitting around a table with the men who, as boys, had likely turned against him? To fully understand the dynamics of these visits, we need to dig deeper into the history. What was everyday life like for Jews and non-Jews in Oberbrechen during the Nazi era? So that's the end of the reading.
Excellent. Starting a stopwatch here so I can time our conversation. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was actually a really wonderful way, the dynamic between the two of you reading this. It's always, as a graphic memoirist, it's always a slightly uncomfortable situation trying to read a comic on a screen, but I really appreciate the way that you each inhabit, the narration and your own voices as the characters in that reading. I thought it was just well done. So thank you for that. So I am going to start with some questions that I have about the book, which is wonderful, and I really I found it very engrossing. I found it incredibly clearly well researched, but also just well written, and that's something that I definitely want to bring into the conversation is the writing and the communication with your illustrator from that point. But first, take us back to how did this project begin? So how did you, as academic researchers, get interested, I want to make sure I get this word right, in microhistorical studies of Jews, a new word for me, microhistorical study of Jews and Christians in this German village? And what can you tell us about the history of Jewish, non-Jewish relations in Oberbrechen? And final part of that loaded question, what did it teach you about German Jewish history in villages like these and in Germany more broadly?
Okay, I'm gonna start. Thank you, Ali, so much for this question. So I will start just talking about the Jewish life in Oberbrechen, and then we maybe in the second part we talk about why we chose the graphic or the how we got into this graphic genre here. So rural life in Germany before 1933 was geographically it was dominated in the Rhine, in the Main area. You found tons of rural neighborhood, and Oberbrechen is one of them. So it's located in a very surrounded by a lot of rural villages with tiny and sometimes even bigger Jewish communities. Oberbrechen had a very tiny Jewish community from the very beginning on. So we have the first Jews recorded in 1711, and it was constantly at a very low level. So in 1933, we still have 5 Jewish households, which were about 33 Jews altogether. And the village was Catholic dominated and had around 1,300 inhabitants. So religiously, these rural communities were mostly Orthodox. Oberbrechen had no synagogue, so the Jewish community would walk to Weiher, or maybe use different transportation to Weiher, to neighboring Weiher, where there was a synagogue and also a cemetery located. With the non-Jewish population, we find interaction, especially in the economic sphere. So some of these Jewish inhabitants were practicing the cattle trade, like the Lichtenstein family, and also from the Stern family. We have a Jewish butcher, and also who sold some small animals. And so in this business sphere, we have a lot of interaction between Jews and non-Jews, but also in the social sphere. So we have to think of rural Germany at a time where the practice of everyday Jewish life was very visible and part of the village community. This is often forgotten today when we think of rural Germany, that Jewish everyday life was part of social life in the village. Yeah, I think I'll leave it by here. And the second part of the question was about how we became interested in
this microhistorical study of Jews and Christians, and what did you learn about those relations intervillage?
Yeah. You want to say something about the microhistorical approach?
Yeah. So actually what you saw in the reading is true. So Stefanie and I were on a way to a conference, and we were talking about what we are working on. And we just both finished our first books, Stefanie's book on cattle traders, on rural Jewish life, and my book was on the pre-war concentration camps. And we were really talking about what happened after the Holocaust and what happened after the war. And you told me about your observations that people were coming back to these little villages in Franconia, which is where Stefanie is from. And it triggered this memory in me that when I was a child, I witnessed the visits of the Oberbrechen Jewish families in our home, which was a very public place, as my grandfather was the mayor of the town. And I somehow had a feeling that something important was going on, but I never really reflected upon it and made sense of it. So we started this partnership of reflecting upon this. And from it grew the first idea to compare a Franconian village and a Hessian village and to see what was different and what was similar. And since this question about how do we tackle the personal in history writing was also in the room from the very beginning, we both thought about how do we do this. And then we came across the graphic history series from Oxford University Press, and Stefanie had encountered authors who had worked with that format. And once we started thinking about, okay, could we present this as a graphic history, that was kind of like a breakthrough with the personal. So we felt that this is a genre, this is a medium that allows us to bring ourselves into the narrative and to make ourselves visible and to tackle this whole question of how do we deal with positionality and subjectivity, and how much should scholars, historians reveal about their backgrounds.
And do either of you have histories of creative writing, if not, specifically graphic historical writing?
So we are two German historians who were trained in the German academic system. Also outside, we have to say, to be fair enough, we both spent some time, myself in US and came in Great Britain and in Israel. So we were exposed to different academic cultures, but we still come from a German academic tradition. And this German academic tradition, especially in history, is not very supportive of thinking about the personal in history writing, to put it mildly. And then secondly, so this was the personal dimension. The graphic genre is not very widespread among German historians, also to put it mildly. And we were so impressed to see this series from different colleagues who worked with Oxford University Press on this graphic history series, that we felt this is the right way, this is the right medium for our story to present it with an artist, also as a mediator between the way how we look at history, to get a new level into our reflection about the history.
And did you find that subjectivity that you mentioned, and what I would call the creative writing aspect of it, did you find that to be just a new challenge to take on? Or did you find like a bit of a discomfort in that situation coming from this strictly historical academic context that you do come from?
Yeah, I can reveal that we did, and that the learning curve was very steep. And since we are based in written text mostly, we had to learn how to narrate and how to research with images, all right? So Liz was very good. Charles Cavalier, who we should mention, our editor at OUP, was very good, getting us to reduce quite drastically the written text on the page and let the images speak.
Yes, it's. I mean, comics, as I know, is a very reductive medium. I mean, you have to be concise. You have to be concise. Sometimes to the extent where you have to omit what seems like important information because it doesn't fit on the page or doesn't fit within the narrative structure. And then, I mean, we'll get more into like the graphics part of it in a later question here. But, I always think about it personally as it's a way when you make a graphic narrative, you're telling a story twice. You're telling it first textually and then visually. And those things must be complementary storytelling. If you're just being redundant and saying the same thing with words and pictures, it's not a very engaging narrative. And if they're too different, then you're going to confuse everyone. So it's a real tightrope walk.
Yeah, it was a real learning process for us. I mean, we came from history writing, like writing text with footnotes, and Germans like to have long footnotes.
Long words, long footnotes. It goes hand in hand. Yes.
And especially when you double it, two authors.
Double the footnotes.
It doubles the amount of text, right?
Yes.
So we had really, it was a learning process for us to reduce the text. But then we learn through the work of art that it allows us actually to be more complex, because the artist gave more nuances to the story than we thought of in the beginning, which we always try to express with words what she could express with art.
As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Whether that's the numerical value in actuality, you can say a lot with images.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's take it back to more of the narrative content of the book. So just tell us what happened in the village during the Nazi years and what happened to the Jews of Oberbrechen in the Shoah.
Sure. So first of all, we want to mention the Stern family. Some members of the Stern family are here tonight. There's Terry Shopto's wonderful book about Hermann Stern, who is a person that you should all know of because he accomplished a wonderful rescue action. Hermann Stern, who is in that image here in the front row in the middle, left Oberbrechen in 1903, so before World War I, and he settled in North Dakota, and he became a businessman, and he basically sponsored the rescue and the journey of many German Jews, many from the family, but also other German Jews, I think over 100 altogether. And we had these images, and this goes back to what we said before of how does that then transform into the graphic narrative. So Liz, who lives in Cape Town, has been given a lot of images, and she actually applied a very realistic form of representing these images. So this is something that we wanted to mention, and I'll get to the history of the Holocaust. So sorry, I'm going back. So one question that we also ask ourselves is how should violence be represented in a graphic narrative? The village itself has its non-Jewish Catholic narrative about what happened during the Nazi period. But researching mostly also compensation files, restitution files, we learned about other accounts of what happened. And one key person is Selma Altmann, born Selma Stern, who experienced physical violence in the village. And here is, I think, an example of what we talked before on the right-hand side of how the text is quite drastically reduced here. And Liz created a dynamic of Selma experiencing harassment in the early years of Nazi power. You can see her there being harassed by SA men, falling. We have her maid Gertrud Marx, who is an important figure in that story, who stood by Selma and her husband, and who tries to help here, tries to intervene, tries to step out of that crowd of so-called bystanders, if you want, to do something. So this is how we represented that. And what is also important about the village is its Catholic culture. One important source that we had was a collection of black and white photographs, about 1,500 black and white photographs that were taken in the village between 1936 and 1939. So a very crucial period in the persecution of German Jews. They were taken by a young chaplain called Franz Pabst, who had a camera. And he documented village life, if you want. And these images are extremely telling because they show the simultaneity of Nazism and Catholic life. So there's a Corpus Christi procession here that you can see. And it also goes to the larger research question of how Catholics behaved under Nazism. So there is this theory that in Catholic-dominated villages, it was also Catholics who implemented Nazism. So was the mayor of Oberbrechen. You can see a school situation here with a swastika flag in the back, the school children sitting there. And you can see Kurt Lichtenstein visiting the village. This is a technique that we developed together with Liz of overlaying different time periods. So you have the Nazi period with that school class, and Kurt experienced anti-Semitic persecution in the context of school. And then he comes back to visit and he sits with his former schoolmates together. And here we have visually a way to tell how trauma lives on in later life. So this is that. And then, maybe just very briefly about that branch of the Stern family. So there were 6 Jews from Oberbrechen who were murdered in the Shoah. 3 of them were Siegfried Sophie and Siegfried's sister Jette Stern, who lived in the town until 1941, when they were expelled to Frankfurt am Main. And from Frankfurt am Main, they were deported to their death in German-occupied Poland. And we were for a long time thinking of how do we represent these very dark chapters of the Holocaust, because the closer you get to the genocide, the less visual images you have and the less sources you have. So there was a lot of research going into the question of what happened to Siegfried, Sophie, and Jette. And we found out that they were deported to Sobibor. And you can see how we work here with this Landsmannian images of the trains to symbolize deportation. And we also have one image of a mass execution in Mali-Trostinets. So this is like the Holocaust part. Yeah, I think I'll leave it here.
Mm-hmm.
Should we go?
Yeah, thank you. We also, one part of the story of Oberbrechen is the story of Hermann Stern. And it's a very privileged to talk about Hermann Stern here today with having members of the Stern family with us here today, what is very special to us. So Hermann Stern, he was born in Oberbrechen and he immigrated to the United States in 1903. He became a very successful businessman in the clothing sector in North Dakota in Valley City. Already like during his formative years, you can say in the United States, he stayed very close in contact with his family in Oberbrechen. And he traveled back after First World War and then and even during a time when there was huge anti-German sentiments or press in the United States, he as a German too stayed in contact with his family in Germany. And then after the Nazis come to power in 1933, he receives letters from family members in Germany. And we used one of these letters. We found it in the archives here in North Dakota. And it's an alarming letter where an anonymous member of the family, he calls himself the Kammer, like a Yiddish word of like a stupid person, so to speak. But he doesn't identify him with his real name. But we found this letter and we interpret it in our book with, or Liz Clark is interpreting the image, not we are doing it, but she made the images. And with this letter where he talks very frankly about the violence in Germany, he doesn't write it from Germany, he travels to the Netherlands, which was free at the time, to write this letter to Hermann Stern. And then he acts, and he gets one after the other out of Germany. And some of them or their family members are here with us today. And altogether, Hermann Stern rescues more than 100 German Jews. Wow. And one of the last families he rescues is the family of Adolf Stern. It's his brother's family. The son is Gustav Stern. We talk about him later on in our book. And he gets them out of Germany even after Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor in late 1941. And they arrive here in New York in February 1942. Wow. This is extremely late and very impressive. So,
wait, sorry, can you just recap that? So the U.S. was already in the war, the borders of Germany already closed.
The Holocaust or the mass shootings in German-occupied Soviet Union had already started in the summer of 1941. The first death camps in Kremnov already started operating. And this late, I mean, they were in South France at the time, but it was almost impossible to get people out. Yeah. And he worked really... he did his utmost to get his family members out, and he had strong relations to the State Department. He worked himself through the wall of bureaucracy. And so in December 1941, he receives a visa for them, and he gets them out of southern France with one of the last ships coming to United States.
Wow.
And we have family from out of Stern with us here today. This is really very impressive. And I think there's only one thing I want to add at this point, that Herman Stern's rescue efforts have been recognized by institutions in the United States. Up to the day, there is no German institution which recognized his rescue efforts. I just wanted to make this.
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe some vocal advocates could, sitting on this very stage, could help make that happen.
Yeah.
So next question I have is something that I found particularly interesting personally was the book's focus on the post-Shoah encounters between Jews and non-Jews, especially in the chapter The Orange Book that deals with that particular 1970s time period, correct? And for my own book, I took research trips to visit my own grandparents' hometowns in Germany and current-day Poland, and I had a lot of conflicting emotions going to these places as I processed those histories of loss. Both, of course, the loss of those family members who were actually murdered in the Shoah, and also that loss of ancestral and cultural home and that loss of ancestral and cultural sense of self. I thought a lot about the German word Heimat, which you use in the book a number of times. I would love to have you, when you answer, to kind of define that for the audience, which a word that I came to know from the German-American cartoonist Nora Krug and her incredible graphic family history of the same name, Heimat, investigating her own family's history in and during the Holocaust as non-Jewish Germans. So what happened during the visits of Jewish former Oberbrecheners in your book, and why did you choose the graphic narrative to tell these stories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for pointing to Nora Krug's work, Ari, and also to your own work. As we said in the beginning, our main interest was actually in the post-Holocaust period, right? We wanted to know what happened during these visits. We then went into the history of violence that kind of underlays it, because we think you cannot understand what happened during the visits if you don't know what happened during the Nazi period, right? So we start the book with this chapter that we read from. Then the next two chapters are going back into the Nazi period, which Liz decided to present in black and white. That's also kind of a visual technique to make it visible for the reader that we are in another time period. And then we go back with that knowledge of the history of violence to the post-Holocaust visits. And we have also been supported by the families. Here are some pictures of Herman Stern and his wife Adeline, who visited in 1972. This was given to us by Rick Stern, a grandson of Herman Stern. And what's interesting about this visit in 1972, so Herman Stern was in the village already before, but here we have photographic documentation of the visit. You can see how we translate that into the drawn images. But what was interesting about this visit is that they did not just come to visit Oberbrechen. It was a larger visit that involved other places in Europe and the young state of Israel. And they went to Israel from Germany. You can see here how the visit of the house, which some of the other members in the audience tonight have also visited, took place. There is Frau Schmidt from the Schmidt family, who lived in that house and who bought it under duress during the Nazi period. You can see a visit to the Jewish cemetery, which is something that almost all visitors did, paying honor to the graves of the ancestors. And you can see a visit to the town hall with the mayor, to the former school. So there is a kind of choreography of places and rituals of how these visits took place. And Rick is also here in the last panel. I'm looking forward to our 2.5 weeks in Israel Wednesday flight. So that's I think an interesting combination. Kurt Lichtenstein, whom we've heard about, visited Oberbrechen for the first time after the war in 1978. And these visits were extensively documented by the local press. And if you remember our reading in the beginning, we were kind of like puzzled because this gives you just one perspective of what happened during the visits. And it was a very reconciliatory tone in which these visits were covered by the local press. Die besten Freunde von Kurt Lichtenstein verwandeln sich über Nacht in Feinde. So the best friends of Kurt Lichtenstein had turned into enemies overnight, which is a very curious way to talk about persecution experienced. We don't get to know what actually happened. We don't get to know who these friends were. The article is very reconciliatory. Kurt came back and he's overwhelmed by the reception, and it's a very harmonious, positive narrative. Through the family, we got these images from first of all, the family images from Oberbrechen, I think is from around early 1930s, if I'm not mistaken. You can see little Kurt here in the red circle, and then Kurt in the Avigdor colony in the 1950s. And this is how we kind of like then translated this. So this, what you also said, Ari, this whole ambiguity that is within a visit was something that we really wanted to bring out.
I think what I would like to add is that we began our project with the letters between Gustav Stern and Eugen Kaspari, one of the local teachers there. And so this could lead to, in the beginning, we only thought that the visit started in the 1970s, but it's not true. The first came back on their own, not trying to be in contact with any of the Germans.
Really, just post-war, correct?
Post-war, right after the war, they came back on their own to go to the Jewish cemetery and to honor the dead. And I think this is really important to know that it wasn't like the Germans reaching out to the Jewish villager and inviting them to come back, but they came on their own initiative, and also like looking for the graves of their family members and maybe mourning the dead, and especially also Selma Altman. Or we have one of these images here. Here. So in the case of the Stern family, Herman Stern does not ask for restitution money from the Schmidts who bought his family house, but he says to the Schmidts, I want you to look after the graves of our parents for the rest of your lives. And this is what happens, actually. So we found it's really important to think about the importance of the preservation and and honoring the dead, which remained back in the so-called alte Heimat, in the old home.
Say something about Heimat?
Oh yeah. And can we just get like a general impression about what the term Heimat means and how that maybe factors into why some of these former Oberbrechen or Jewish people came back to explore that environment?
It's a very loaded term, I think, and it's very difficult to translate it into English. So home is maybe one translation. Nora Krug uses the term belonging, which I think brings us closer to it. So it has a lot to do with identity and where I come from and how this shapes me, and how maybe even landscape or language, the local dialect, the local food culture. Right? The food culture.
You mentioned in the book that there's, a lot of these former Oberbrecheners, these Jewish people, when they were like living in America or other places that had intense anti-German sentiments post-war, that going back to Germany for some was the way to actually reconnect, like in earnest, with that lost cultural heritage of theirs.
Exactly. So especially German Jews who came to the United States, they had to often hide their feelings of cultural belonging to a German culture, because in the United States, the more came from Eastern Europe, and so it was a different atmosphere for German Jews to come here. And then there was the question is, where's a place for these feelings of loss of a cultural belonging, and how to express it. And my impression was from reading Gustav Stern's letters that in his contact with Eugen and others in Oberbrechen, he had somehow a chance to reconnect, but also to mourn his feelings or the loss of cultural belonging to a German culture.
Absolutely. Now, and my final question before we invite some special guests on stage. Although she's not on stage with us right now, we couldn't talk about this graphic history without mentioning the illustrator Liz Clark, who contributed a significant amount of work to this project. So, and to bring it to life, really. So, what was the process of collaboration like with your artist, with your collaborator Liz Clark, and as a graphic memoirist who sometimes leans into visual conjecture to get to the heart of an idea versus necessarily the pure history of this idea, how did that relationship, how did the subjectivity versus objectivity factor into that? Telling the artist, no, you have to stay within these bounds, or giving them permission to expand beyond the bounds.
Yeah. So that was a very, very fruitful and creative and pleasant cooperation, I have to say, with Liz, who, as I said before, never set foot on German soil, never have seen a German village, and in her creativity and her artistic skill, created this world from images. So we provided Liz with a lot of images, and most of our research process was into searching for historical images. Many of you here helped us with that, so thank you. And then Liz was also the one who was thinking about the different graphic schemes. So we have 4 different periods, 4 different time periods in the book, and to tell them apart, she was wonderfully creative in coding every time period in its own style, and sometimes they do overlap, as we can see here in that example about Holocaust compensation, which is a very important chapter in this history. Should I claim compensation? Should I take money from what the Germans call in that very problematic phrase Wiedergutmachung, making good again, right? And you can see here, without reading the speech bubbles, that this page kind of like breaks apart, and that the past is always present. The past is always present. We see here Siegfried and Flora, Lichtenstein in the Avigdor colony, being situated within a discussion about should I claim compensation or not. And when they walk away, you can see Flora's sister Irma, who was killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1942, her fate or her story being graphically present. And I think this is something very important that the graphic medium allows you to do, to just show how trauma and how experience of violence lives on. And we talked about it today, even across the generations, of course. And we don't have to use a lot of words to make that clear.
Yes. Do you have anything you would like to add, Stefanie, before you?
Yeah, I think this is what I just want to add is it's really different from what you did. You worked as an artist, like
I had no one to answer to but myself. Is this correct?
Yeah. So we came to this medium as historians, as you said in the beginning, who were again trained with writing text and footnotes, and I can draw. My daughter can draw much better than I do. So, but it was for us and very creative process to collaborate with Liz Clark, even we never met in person, that we developed or invented images which then she drew. What was fascinating to see, but then it went back and forth between her and us, and through this going back and forth, I think like we kind of also had to force ourselves to think about over and over again, what do we try to say here in this panel? What exactly is our message? And this was really a very fruitful process.
Absolutely. Okay. So for our next question, we would like to invite some very special members from the audience who had a role in the making of this book. We have a number of descendants of Jewish families that once lived in Oberbrechen here in the audience. And we would like to broaden the panel right now to invite Doris and Ronnie Frank to the stage. So if you will please come up and sit with us. And I'll let either Stefanie or Kim introduce them in their relationship to this project, and then we'll have some questions for them.
Yes, so we're very, very happy, Doris and Ronnie, that you agreed to come on this panel, because it tells us that this is also a community and collaborative project. Doris is the eldest daughter of Kurt Lichtenstein. Doris, you were born in may I say? Yeah.
1954.
So not only is it Ronnie's birthday today, but Doris was born in the same year, 1954, in the Avigdor colony, which you've seen. You both grew up in Buenos Aires, which is where you met. And you then decided to do a remarkable thing, namely leave Argentina and go back to Germany. And 2 of your 3 children were born in Germany. One is here, Romina. And then after 17 years, you moved to the US. And if I remember correctly, since 1997, you are living in the US now. And what is interesting is that you both visited Oberbrechen together with Kurt and Susie, Kurt's, your mother, Doris, Kurt's wife. And that we have established contact. We looked it up again in 2019, so that's already 4 or 5 years ago now. And it was a very meaningful moment for us in doing this project when we got into contact with you, and we were very anxious of how this would be received, especially because of the graphic genre,
Yeah.
right?
And let's start with that question for Doris and Ronnie. What was that process like? First, of being contacted out of the blue by these, very nice seeming, but you don't know people until you meet them. These very nice seeming German academics who had this idea for this book. How did that strike you at first when they first got in touch? And then what was that collaborative process like throughout the research for them?
I want to say something first.
Yes, please.
I didn't read the book, and I know why. It's very hard. I have 2 tissues, one in each arm. It's trauma. It's this generational trauma, to live that and to see it, because I lived it, not directly, but through Avigdor, it came directly to me, and it's very traumatic. So first, I wanted to say that. We met Kim with Ronnie and my parents one time when she was, 5 years, 6 years, when we went with my parents, when we visited the village. And she was standing there, so we knew who she was. And it's good. It was very important to explain. And now we see why nowadays, what's happening, to explain and to tell what happened and what the reverberations are of that time. And something else, I always made fun of my father because he had such a strong German accent. This is his revenge. Here I am.
Here you are.
If I may say, yeah, I read the book. We were contacted. One of the reasons is because Doris' mom, Susie, didn't want to have anything to do with the whole thing, which is understandable. So it was an effort for us to try to find pictures and some histories. And when we got the book, I just read it with the idea, I don't know about the Stern family, but our side, I know everything, so it's going to be nothing new. And it shocked me how the graphics affected me, because I knew the story. And obviously seeing, it's fascinating. I've read comics, Superman and Batman when I was a kid. It's amazing.
Nice Jews, Superman and Batman and Spider-Man.
Yeah, but what is amazing, what they were talking about, how we can reduce a page with 7 footnotes to sometimes one image, even without words. Now, having known my father-in-law and their parents, I cannot fathom how Liz Clark, without knowing them at all, just from a picture, was able to project feelings on one little, what you call it?
Panel.
And that shocked me. So I read it, but I had to put it down and go back and read it. Regarding the cooperation, it was just fun. Because we started sending some stuff, and then we did some Zooms and talked far too much, which is what I always do. And then we were able to answer specific questions. Doris has two cousins in Córdoba, Argentina, who are the daughters of Irene Kurtz's brother, sister, and they started pulling out a photo, which then was very useful. So it was a work in process.
Can we show it again?
Even he's the son-in-law. We started dating at 15.
Wow.
So we met in Jewish Sunday school at 9 years old. So he is part of the family. And he was the son my dad didn't have.
I never understood her grandfather, Siegfried. I'm going to be blunt saying it. Every time I was at the house, he was sitting there waiting to die. He wouldn't talk. He wouldn't say anything. He put on his tie on Shabbos, and he was sitting there, and it was very hard to get in touch. After reading this, I fully understand.
And my dad said that my grandfather, it was one person when he went on the boat and a different person when he left the boat.
Wow.
Not in a good way.
Wow. And I mean, I think just to go back to a previous discussion point that we talked about German Jewish, descendants of German Jews going back to Germany, which you not only went back to visit, but you went to live there for 17 years. So how did that affect your understanding of your cultural inheritance? How did it affect your processing of that historical trauma? And what are some takeaways for that experience?
We were there only for 2 years, theoretically.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, it
only
was 2 years.
Okay, sorry.
17 years after we left for the United States.
Understood.
And we, in Argentina, we had a dictatorship, right? And at the beginning, we fought saying it's not true what's happening. It's really not true. We were in Switzerland arguing with Amnesty International, telling me, it's not true what you're saying. And that made us think later. Germans didn't know. A lot of them made us understand that through our own experience with Argentina. So many people died there. And, I hate when they said I knew somebody. My best friend was Jewish. That's not happening. No. But I did accept it and learned the interest of people we met. We lived in Friedrichshafen, we lived in Augsburg, we lived in Aschaffenburg. So in different places, we were always very well received, very interested at school. We don't eat pork, we don't eat shellfish. Pork, especially in Germany is very difficult not to have. And when our children were invited to parties, there was always food for them, special food, so something that they could enjoy. So our experience was good. But we saw people when we were looking and said, "What? I don't know what he did, right, before." And when we left to the States, our friends couldn't understand. They couldn't understand where we were leaving for not a better place. Financially, it was really going down, half of it. So, and we told them, it's too close. It's too close with what happened for us to be back living in Germany forever. And we thought on our children.
And just one final follow-up before I think we have to open up to a Q&A here, but did you having had lived through the dictatorship in Argentina at that time, do you feel that helped you better understand or even empathize more with the German
Yes, at the
population that
beginning.
lived through the
Yes, at the
Nazi years?
beginning, yeah, and I think, and then Ronnie, because he's part of me, people were scared because we know that your children could act on you and tell you and denounce you to the Nazis. They were scared.
Yes.
So, and that's a big thing. You don't want to lose your life or end in a concentration camp.
I fully agree.
Well, I think we need to open this up to a Q&A from the audience. And do we have a mic or anything, or should we just do like a repeat versus? Okay, so so please, we'll start with you in the front, sir, and tell your question, and then whoever answers it, please repeat the question so it can register in the microphones. Yes.
Evita Peron went to Rome right after the war in order to help establish the rat line to get Nazi war criminals out through the Catholic Church and the Red Cross. I'm wondering how you feel now when Mele is a follower of Schneerson. I mean, has Argentina changed at all? Because they used to say that after the war, the only people they had in Argentina were Nazi war criminals and Holocaust survivors. I mean, what's happened to Argentina?
It's correct what you say.
He's historian in the
But
family.
Werner von Braun, who was the engineer who did all your rockets, was no church boy either. So it's just a constant change. And in all of what you said, you're right, but there are two ways. Millet, I guess it's not the discussion for tonight, but what I always said is Argentina is like a petri dish of history. I can tell you 15 things which started there and later happened. Perón, Trump, or what we would call mesas de dinero, tables of money, which are primitive hedge funds. We can talk afterwards if you're interested. But it's basically.
Other questions? Yes, in the back, in the blue.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your book. I'm of German Jewish descent on my father's side, who was born in Argentina and then immigrated. He and his brother immigrated to the U.S. when Fidel came to power. Coincidentally, I think. So I've been back to my grandfather's ancestral village, and I've been struggling to write about that trip because the villagers in the present some of them are working to commemorate, and the Jews who left by 35. My great grandparents were the last to leave. The cemetery is still there. Anyway, so I don't know if it's fair to put this question on you both, but struggling to write, and I've tried autoethnography, I've tried all of these different approaches, and it's not working. And maybe this is a question, maybe this is something we could talk about later. Maybe, I don't know if this is for everybody, but yeah, I did want to publicly thank myself.
Thank you, and I think I would really like to learn more about the struggles or what keeps you away from writing it, because I would love to read it and to learn more about it. Yeah.
I've written it. The problem is it's not working because I don't think I know what it is. So maybe yes, that would be great. I'd love to show it to somebody else and say how you have ideas. So that would be great.
Maybe I can comment to that. So you were telling us about how difficult it is writing about the place, right? Your your grandfather came from a German town, and your struggles about how to write about it. Actually, when we decided to do this project, the visits were a focal point. And we concentrated on what happened during the visits, and what the graphic genre allowed us is not to spell things out, not to present an interpretation that is the ultimate interpretation, but we embraced this genre because it gave us a possibility to keep certain questions open, right? And let everybody maybe find their own answers to what happened there. Is this complete irritation, a misunderstanding, or is there maybe some like genuine grassroots attempt to reconnect after violence, after trauma, after genocide? And we always tell the story that when the manuscript was peer-reviewed by OUP, the peer reviewer made an observation that in the written text we are much clearer with our judgment as historians than in the graphic narrative. So maybe the advice is to focus on something very concrete and very specific, and still try to preserve that openness, and your own struggle is part of this history, and maybe it should find a place to be in a narrative, however that narrative will look like.
And do we have time for maybe one or two more questions? Okay, two more. Okay, right in the front, sir. Here.
In your research, could you identify stages by which the Germans confronted their past?
It's a very important question. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we have where to start. So when we started with the visits, as Kim said, like we were really we had so many questions about how these visits went on and which emotions came out of it. And then we said in the very beginning, no, before we can understand the visits, we need to understand the Nazi history of the town. So who were the perpetrators and who was present there during the visits from this, what was their history during the Nazi years. So we checked all the Nazi files and the names who was there in the town. And so it was a Catholic town, so there was, compared to other regions, the percentage of so-called party members was lower, but still we have one of the main actors, Eugen Kaspari, who openly spoke about him as a child mocking Moses Stern, one of the elderly family members. So he was very open about it also in his letters to Gustav Stern. And I think this was one of the reasons why he came back, or why he could come back, because he identified himself as one of the people who participated in anti-Semitic violence during the 1930s. It was different with Jupp Kramen. I don't know if so with Kim's Opa, he was too young, so to speak, to be a party member in 1933. He was born in 1925. Thank you. He was born in 1925, so he was also a kid at the time. But so we only found out about his Nazi membership after the graphic narrative was already completed. So we completed it 2 years ago, and then shortly afterwards we found some documents that he joined the Nazi party in April 1944 at the age of 17. And he stayed silent about his Nazi membership to Kim and other family members throughout his lives, even though he built up very close relationships to Kurt Lichtenstein. And we have no evidence that he ever spoke to Kurt Lichtenstein about his Nazi membership when they met.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I can maybe answer the second,
Yeah.
sorry,
No, please.
the second part of your question, how they confronted it. And I don't know how to phrase it clean, so bear with me. In the 17 years we lived, and that was from 1980 to 97, I cannot talk about today. As a Jew, I felt, it's not ashamed, but I felt a little unwell, because every year in German television and media and whatever, there was a time, usually around the fall, where this whole thing of Holocaust and Shoah came continuously in movies, in discussions. Now, I was very familiar to it, and I would say, slow it down a bit. It's been some time ago, which is a wrong thing to say, because obviously the younger people, today young people don't even know what happened. But the way the German cultural or whoever did it, kept imposing it, was impressive. As a comparison, living in Friedrichshafen, close to Austria, zip.
But also with our oldest son, who was in the gymnasium, they have to go. It's in the curriculum to go to a concentration camp. It's what you have to do and confront the past. And sorry, about your grandpa, one thing is I know, and that's what my father said, that he always stuck to him during the school time. He was not one who mocked him or beat him. And that's very important. I also think that your grandpa joined the Nazi party, not because he wanted. You have no choice. You have no choice at that time. But to join, if not, it's not good.
And I can only imagine what that would have been like for your son to be the I would imagine the sole Jewish representative on the concentration camp tour with these other young German people, and then feeling that onus of being the representative, being the, the one with the attention on them for that reason.
It's not easy, but it's important for all the young people when we live there, right? I'm not talking about now because things change, right?
I think I just would like to add one thing about these Germans confronting the Nazi past. I think what is important about to see in this, especially in these rural areas, we have tons of these non-Jewish German local historians who write the Jewish history of their town and become very engaged in preserving Jewish heritage in their town. But it often goes hand in hand with silencing the perpetrator history of the town. And this was also the case in Oberbrechen. So until today, there is no history about the perpetrator history of Oberbrechen, right? I mean, we talk about it a little bit in our book, but it hasn't been done yet. And also Jupp Kram, he was very engaged in organizing these visits for former Jewish Oberbrecheners, but at the same time, he also honored the late Nazi mayor when he died. So we have to think of this process also with these ambiguities in this whole process. Yeah,
complicated history, to say the least. We have time for one more quick question. How about in the back here with the hand? You with the hand. Go on.
Whether German publishers are interested in translation, because that is also crucial. It's nice to have it in the United States and in England, but what's going on in Germany?
Well, we hope. So the question is whether German publishers would be interested in a translation. And Marion, that's actually the question that is all the time asked when we now present the book in Germany. We just presented it in Berlin 2 weeks ago. When will there be a German translation of it? We'll hope to work with OUP on this
If you're
project.
listening right now, OUP.
Yeah, I think it's important. Also for the villagers, right? Most of them don't really speak English. For me, it was also a bit of putting distance between a very personal thing and a scholarly enterprise. But yeah, the time will come, and we'll hope that it will be available and that it will be widely read.
And it was important for us to make clear that the history of Oberbrechen, like of any other German town, continued abroad through the Nazi years. So it continued in Valley City, it continued in Buenos Aires as a result of the Nazi persecution. And the heritage there is still very much alive in these families, but the language is not alive anymore. And it meant something to us also to give it back to these communities. And so maybe German doesn't come first here, doesn't come first in this case.
Well, before we say a big thank you to our wonderful authors, I wanted to quickly do a quick exercise here because I know we have a number of people in our audience who are descendants of Jewish Oberbrecheners visiting us. Could we get those people in the audience to either stand up or at least raise your hand to show us who's who's here representing the Jews of Oberbrechen today, beyond our wonderful Doris on stage? Wow. Well, so thank you. Thank you for being here. And I want to say a wonderful thank you to both Kim and Stefanie, as well as Doris and Ronnie, for sharing the stage with us. Thank you for your wonderful book, and thank you for being here to talk with
And
us
thank
about
you,
it.
Ari, for this wonderful moderation.
Thank you all.
Good.